Aloha! So I have a project here that can be done with eucalyptus, or you can kind of alter the shape of them to make koa leaves very easily. We're going to learn about softening and blending. We're going to do some dropping in of paint color, and we're going to do some lifting. Okay, so this is my first example that I did. Here's some of my colors I used down here. I just used these three primary colors and a little bit of brown in this other one. So cool yellow, a cool blue, although it looks like it got contaminated, and a cool red. All right. So I've got my drawing already transferred to my watercolor paper, and I'm going to do my mixing in these areas. I've already wet down my palette colors and got them activated. One thing I am missing is a little swatch of paper to test my colors on. Alright, now we're set, got my brushes ready. So I am going to do similar to what I did before, except this time I'm going to use some warmer colors first and see what I get. But if you like the other ones, they're pretty accurate, I think, to what you see in real life, the cool mixture. I'm going to use a warm yellow, and yeah, I probably pulled my other one from here. It's kind of a contaminated green, or contaminated blue, that's okay. We'll just see what kind of stuff we got. There was a lot of paint over there, so I didn't really want to just get rid of it all, so I thought I'll just use it in a project. Alright, it's looking kind of interesting. Alright, I like that. It's kind of a gray-green color, but I want to have some variations. I don't want to have just flat gray-green, so this is where this other section comes in. I'm going to have an area that's a little bit more blue. I'll pull this paint out of the corner here. And when I put that on my swatch next to it, they blend nicely. There's some of the same colors. And I guess I should say, because I'm mixing this warm yellow with a cool blue, it will make it a little bit more muted. You might not want to add a red in there, but you can. If you do add a little bit of a red in there, you can see which one you like best. I'm going to go with this alizarin crimson. I always do a little too much red. See what kind of toned down colors we can get, and I'm going to test a little bit with this pink. See, did it again. And they're both pretty. And I'm also going to do this coral color I have. I'm just going to make a fresh swatch over here. Okay, so I'm going to go with the coral one. A little bit of touch of coral and a little bit of the warm yellow and the phthalo blue green shade, which might have been contaminated by some other stuff at some point, but that's okay. So I'll be working in these three areas. And I may have to mix up some more at some point. We'll see. Alright, so this first leaf, we're going to do some practice over here. Oh, I'm going to jot down my colors so I don't forget. Okay, I might not even use the brown this time, we'll see. Alright, so we're going to practice doing wet into wet, and I'm going to just put some clear water on this practice leaf. This is the Fabriano studio paper that's like 25% cotton, I think. So it's pretty sturdy, but I've noticed it takes a while for the water to set in. So I'm just going to pause a little bit and wait for this puddle to turn into more of a satiny, glistening sheen. Alright, so my leaf has turned a little bit more satiny and might have dried a little bit too much. We shall see. I'm going to load my brush up. I don't want too much on there because I don't want to make another puddle. And I can tell it's going to be very, very light. So if I want to add something interesting, so it's not such a pale, pale flower, I want to add a little bit more of a saturated color, right? You can also pull that paint down into the stem. Alright, so I'm going to grab maybe a little bit more blue, a little bit of that red, and I am going to just add that color to one side. I'm going to let it do its thing. There's going to be areas where it blends over to the other side. I'm going to try not to touch it too much. I do want to soak this puddle up at the very end. Drag some down to the stem area. Okay, it's pretty fun to watch what it does. Those areas where, so I left like a little bit of a line in there, yeah? And then I touched some areas together, and then where the blue and the pale green came together later, it just kind of did its thing. Sometimes those highlights end up a little bit too big in the middle. I kind of go back and adjust them. Okay, so looking at this, I can tell it's still going to be pretty light. So I added a little variation there. If I want to, I can have a little bit more of a saturated mixture. Let's see what we get here. Still working with the same colors. Yep, I'm really good at putting way too much of that phthalo blue in there. Okay, so this is more saturated than what I put on there already. Okay, so I could maybe do a little bit more blue. Testing it. Okay, so this is still glistening satin. So I'm going to go back in. This is a fun time to do some extra stuff. And I'm doing just a little bit less than what I did before. Okay, and I don't want a puddle because it'll start to do some funky stuff. So I'm tilting my paper a little bit here to help it run down the page. I'm going to clean this edge up a little bit. There we go. Okay, dabbing my brush, soaking it up, dabbing it in, just repeating that process until I get that little puddle soaked up. Okay, you can use a smaller brush for this stem if you want. I have a really good point on this one. I love these brushes. It's the Raphael Imitation Kolinsky round brushes. They don't have a wide range of sizes, but I really like the bristles on it, and it's not expensive like a real Kolinsky, which I've never tried. I don't know if they're worth it, but yeah, this one's pretty good. I like it so far. I have a few different sizes. Found them on Amazon, and it's just a little bit of shipping. So I'm just yapping while I'm waiting for this to dry. So I like to keep an eye on things as they dry because sometimes they'll start to spread out in ways I didn't expect, or maybe there's puddles that start to form after a while that I didn't expect to see. So I'll go back and kind of swipe them with a damp, clean brush if necessary, or do a little bit of tilting. Generally try not to mess with it too much though. Okay, so we're going to do this one over here. We're just going to try a different color mixture. Maybe a little bit more of this. This time we are going to do something that is a little bit more dry. So we're not going to wet the paper first. Let's find the colors I want. Do a fresh batch of that green. Turned a little too olive. Okay, so this time I want to load my brush up pretty good because there's no other water involved. This is going to be a lot more bold than the first one. Okay, so I'm going to go down the left side of this leaf. You can see as I go, I'm stabilizing my hand with my pinky, and I'm also putting varying amounts of pressure on that brush as I go down the side. Okay. I also am a big fan of flipping papers around, and that bead of water that I had, or bead of pigment, I'm still dragging it across my subject. Going back up, and you can see that I'm starting to lose some pigment. I'm actually going to wipe a little bit off there as well. This is totally fine because I do want some variation here. I don't want it to be all the same color on each side of this leaf. Okay. So same colors, just finding something a little bit darker to do on some areas. Ooh, yeah, there it is. I like that. Okay, still glistening. I'm gonna start up here, and I'm just gonna do it a little bit more on the left side. I'm going to let it flow down the paper. Okay, tilting my paper a little bit. Just tilting it. I don't want to go too far up. I'm going to wipe my brush a little bit and start to remove some of this extra puddly stuff. And then I'm going to pull some of that down to the stem area. Now I kind of lost some of the darkness on the stem, so I'm going to go back in, add a little extra to that area. Oop, I got a little wiggly. Okay, so here is where it's starting to do something kind of funky, right? So this area up here has already started to dry. This area is no longer shiny in any way, but this other stuff is, right? So this wet paint kind of reached the point where it could go no further, and it sort of just stopped there. Whereas when we did this one, because we wet it down to start with, the whole thing was much more damp, and it stayed damp for a longer amount of time. And so it did all these other cool things in here, right? So I'm actually going to leave this, and later I'm going to show you a softening technique. If you decide, I don't really like that area, what it's done right there as it dries, there's ways that you can adjust it, but let it dry first, right? We're going to move on to this curly leaf. So this is where we're going to practice some different color variations. So I have 3 sections here, right? This farthest section of the leaf is away from me. Then I have the section of the leaf that's in front and closest to me. And then I have this area of the leaf where it curves underneath, right? So I'm going to have a slightly warmer green here in this area that's closest to me. I'm going to make it turn a little bit cooler as it turns away. And then I'm going to have a more desaturated, cooler color down here to make it look like it's in shadow. So you can do this in any order that you like, really. But I think this time I'm going to start with this little shadowy area down here. And I've got a nice blue color that I like already. And that part I'm not going to do the wet on wet technique with the clear water first. I'm just gonna straight up fill that in, dabbing my brush, taking care of that final little bead at the end. Okay. Now I'm just gonna sit for a minute and let this dry because I don't necessarily want this shadowy color to blend into this part of the leaf that's on top. I want this top part to be like very obvious that it's on top, okay? So I want a nice sharp line here basically. So I'm gonna just sit for a minute. So this is almost dry, but I'm gonna start with this back area and I am gonna do the wet on wet technique. I'm gonna get really close to that shadowy area I just painted. Down. I'm going to leave a little bit of a highlight in the middle just to make it a little bit more interesting. And this time I went ahead and I drug that clear paint down into the stem. Okay, so I'm going to have a little bit more blue color in the back. So I'm getting my paint ready. Ooh, I like that. And a little bit more yellow in the front. I think I need a little more. Oh, that'll be fun, I think. Okay. Looks like we are pretty much ready to add paint over here. Ooh, it's pretty wet. Just gonna go down the back side of that leaf. And if you want to switch to different brush, you can for that stem. It's kind of a puddle down there, so I'm gonna dab and wipe that while I'm here. Okay, and then a little bit more yellow on this front side. Still sort of avoiding that white center area. So sometimes they do look a little bit too bold of a white if you leave a center line like that, but you can always go back and soften it. But then at least you'll have a white area that will add a little bit of interest. Okay, and I think I'm going to add a little bit more pigmented area down here at the bottom. And I'm going to move my paper around. That's fun. I'm going to help it over here on the side just a little bit. I'm going to grab some of this with the tip of my brush, soak it up. So we just did something very similar to what we did up here, right? But you can see because this area was damp already and it was staying damp for a long time, it didn't dry nearly as fast as this one did. So it gives you a little bit more of a smooth gradient there. I'm also going to add just maybe a smidge more yellow in that one area. So I'm going to drop in a little bit extra color. I've got to get my hand at just the right angle so I don't block the video. Okay, so now let's say I want to actually lighten a little bit, I can come in with a clean, damp brush while this whole thing is still damp. And I can lift. See how that got a little bit lighter there? So let's say I want to add a little bit more variation back down in this dark area. That blue will stain very, very easily, so you'll never make it completely white again, but what you can do is lighten it. And I think this area back here is starting to dry. So I might have to stop messing with this real soon. Okay, I'm going to come back to this one, leave the last curvy one alone, and I'm going to use my favorite worst brush. It is a very small, cheap brush by Zen or Royal and Langnickel, one of their Zen line. Actually, I really like their mop brush. It's pretty affordable. You don't have to get crazy expensive with those mop brushes. Like, they get the job done. But they also have this little bright brush, is what it's called, or bright angled. It's very stiff and small. And so I'm just going to get the end of it a little bit damp, and I'm going to work softly in this area to make that transition a little bit, like just blend it a little bit more. You do have to kind of load these brushes up with a little bit more water more frequently, but that's okay. And there's other ways you can soften this. Now, that will sometimes get a little funky when you do this method, but you can dab it like I just did with a paper towel. Okay. And I think I'm also going to come back in and I'm just going to paint, like glaze over this whole side and kind of bring that color back together to make it a little bit more cohesive, basically. And I'm going to stick with the method of just going straight in with that color, not going to do any of that water. Okay, so that brought it together, right? And then you can't even tell that anything happened there. Dragging that bead of water down to the end, okay? You can see a little variation, I guess. I'm gonna do the other side as well. Wiping my brush, getting rid of that little bead at the end. Sometimes they kind of get caught in funky places, but okay. I want to make that look a little more cohesive. Okay, there we go. I'm going to stop messing with that one. Okay. So back down here with this leaf that has this really bright highlight in there. This thing still feels a little bit damp, but that's okay. I'm gonna go in with a clean, damp brush, and I'm just gonna soften a little bit on the edge of the highlighted area, and this will sort of glaze over the white area with the paint that's on either side of the highlight. Okay. You can come back in and you can just add like very diluted amount later if you want to soften it even more. So here's a little bit more of that paint. If you think, oh my gosh, this is just too distracting, too bright. So I just toned it down a little bit right there, right? Okay, so I'm gonna let that guy go. And we are going to practice doing our big leaf with what we've learned. So this time I'm gonna mix up a really big puddle of my colors. Have a few different variations throughout the different sections of my palette. Some are going to be a little bit more green, more evenly green. Some will be a little bit more on the yellow side, some on the blue side. Let's make a big, this one's kind of changed over time, so I'm going to make my very blue one over here have more of a shadow color. Okay, I'm going to test these. I just added a ton of blue to that one. I'll go back and add some yellow. Almost looks too yellow. That looks kind of cool when blended together though. And more of an even green over here. Yeah, I'm digging those. So I'm going to come in and do the clear water method. If you paint really fast, you can probably do more than one leaf at a time. But if you are not used to moving pretty quickly, then I would recommend just doing one leaf at a time. I'm going to grab another brush and do my clear water with that one because this one has some good paint on it. I don't want to lose it. And I have not dampened the back side of my paper. When I just do like a little doodle like this that has a white background, I don't find it's really necessary. It's more if you have like a big scenery or like big sky, big water, big land, or you're working on a piece that includes some background colors as well, and then it needs a little bit more wetness on the back side to help even out how each side of the paper dries. So if you have like really wet paper on the top but not the back, your paper might curl. It doesn't do it so much with the arches. It does do it with the Fabriano and some other stuff. But yeah, this is no big deal. Okay, so I had some nice green. I'm just gonna go in there. Somehow it ended up very pointy at the top. I got some cool stuff going on here that's very watercolory. I like that. Got a bit of a puddle going on in some areas. I'm going to tilt my paper a little bit. You can see all that water is rushing down a little bit, down to the bottom. So I'm going to pull that there. For now, I'm going to add a little bit of variation in color. See, it's pretty wet. I can just let it do its own thing. Maybe a little bit more up here. Okay, so I can see the area I want to lift a little bit. Maybe bring back some of that center area. Okay, I'm gonna let that one go and move on to the next leaf. Oops, got a little paint booger on there. Add a little more yellow on the back side of that, or the tip side of it. Okay, so I'm going to do a little lifting. Bring back some of that lighter area towards the center of that leaf. Okay, leaving that one. This one, I think I'm going to make a little bit more on the yellow side, because it's like facing us, and so it's kind of more of a focal point. So I'm gonna do more of that yellow. Oop, let's wet it first. Oop. Big old drop of water there. Maybe I did need that water after all. I thought it was gonna be too much, so I wiped it away. Oop, get a little bit wiggly there. That's okay. Oops. I got the drop skis. And a piece of dog hair. Alright, so if you ever get like a little hair, cat or dog or whatever on your paper, if it's wet, you can kind of brush it with the tip of your brush, and it'll usually pick up the brush and you can wipe it away. Sometimes it just stays stuck. Alright, let's see. Let's use... I want something kind of in between these two. My paint is drying over here on the side. I'm trying to get a little bit more saturated area because we don't want to add a more watery ratio of paint to water to an area that you've already painted. Unless you are okay with cabbage blooms. Some people like them. I kind of like them in backgrounds, but I don't want them here. So that's why I was trying to make sure I had a little bit more saturation level there. Okay, I'm just cleaning up my edges a little bit. With cold pressed paper, sometimes the edges need a little tightening as they dry. They'll be a little bit jagged. Okay, so I think I'm going to lift that center area again. have like a little bit more of a red batch over here that we used to darken some stem areas. I'm going to wait on painting the stem that's touching that leaf that I just painted. So I would like to darken these stems and do the main stem that's going down, but it would run into my leaf. I'm going to let that go for now. I am going to come over here and do that color from the bottom and drag it outwards. So I want to show you actually how to use one of these rigger brushes. They don't hold a lot of water, but you just dampen them and then drag them through the color you want. And then it's really helpful for things like sticks and tree branches and stuff where you get to the end of a tree, because you can just pull this along and sort of get like this wiggly look without much effort. So it's kind of fun. You can skip some areas because we're going to paint some berries on some of that too. Maybe there's a little bit more extra branches and twigs than what you originally put in there. Right? So I was pulling it toward me, and that's that. You can also use a very small brush, like a number 1. One of the brushes that you have that's maybe a little bit more springy than the soft ones when you get down to these small areas, because then you won't have so much paint and water loaded into a tiny area that could just like splash everywhere. Alright, so I'm going to come back here and do my last couple leaves. That's fun. And let's see. So I'm getting real close to the center area there. Gonna leave a little bit blank. Maybe I'll add a little bit more blue. And I've got a clean, damp brush. I'm going to soften this a little bit here by pulling some of that pigment down into that wet area. Okay, I'm also going to use it to tidy up some of my edges. Kind of ran away from me there. I think my center area almost had it where I didn't have to do this, but I am going to lift some of that area as well. There's these cool white highlights towards the end there. I don't know if I like them or not. I can always go over them later though, right? Okay, and then my last leaf, again with the curly area. I'm going to do that. Okay, I did not do that wet into wet, right? And then this one actually is only showing 1/2 of the leaf. So I really just have one color I need to do. So I'll probably do a little bit more of a yellow. I am going to wait for that to dry, and in the meantime I'm going to get some more of that brown color I had going and add it to the stem area. Have to mix it again. I think I used it up. That's a good one. Okay, so I'm just going to come and add with a tiny brush, do some of that stem that I want to be a little bit darker and different from the leaf. Okay, and also have this one coming down. Okay, I'm going to do that last part there. With more saturated yellowish green color than what I had used before. And I think I'm going to skip the wet on wet because it's not that big of a deal really. Like I just have this one leaf. I'm not going to do anything too crazy fancy to it. Okay, you can see I'm moving my paper quite a bit to really get the most ergonomic position for my hand. All right. Wipe a little bit, soak up that puddle. Okay, and then make a little bit more brown area down here where that stem is. Okay, so I can always go back, and it seems like this one ended up kind of flat, so I could go back when this dries and add another layer. Maybe the same for really all of these, could maybe use like a little bit more oomph. I think my ratio of paint to water was pretty high. Sorry, there's more, let me say this, let me say it this way, there's more water than paint. It was a pretty watery mixture for all the stuff that I did, so it ended up quite a bit lighter, and there wasn't much of a difference between each of my green variations as far as the saturation of pigment in that mixture. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a few little berries over here though. I'm going to use the same yellow. Maybe have a few different variations of some brown. I think I want a little bit more clear yellow color. Ooh, my water is really dirty. So here's what I'm gonna do. I am gonna add some of this yellow over here. So, there we go. Okay, so for little round berries and flower shapes and things, you can use a round pointed brush. That's totally fine. But if you have a filbert brush, it can be a little bit easier because you can make that round shape easier without worrying about the point of the brush because the point will end up doing all kinds of crazy things. So I am going to use a filbert brush for this, and this is Princeton Velvet Touch number 4, and I'm going to make some round shapes in different areas. Some of them are going to blend together, some of them might be behind others. Sometimes I'll take some of the pigment from one and move it to another because I can tell there's going to be a big old puddle of something. Sometimes I'll grab a darker area or darker pigment and add it to some areas to make like a little bit of a shadow. So there's another way you can do this where you could just add your berries in there haphazardly and then do your twigs on top of that, connecting it so you can kind of place the berries where you think they'll be good first and then worry about the twigs around it. I think I have some kind of dust or something that was on my brush there. Okay. Let's see. This one looks lonely. Let's add something. Wiping my brush sometimes. So there's a very light one back here. Feels like it needs something else, but I don't know where. Maybe just like a little part of a berry peeking out here and there. Okay. We're just gonna roll with that. Okay, so there you have it. There's our colors used down here. A warm yellow. This was permanent yellow from Daniel Smith. Phthalo blue green shade, and what is it? Coral? Quinacridone coral. Those are the only 3 colors I used. And these are some of the brushes, a couple different rounds. I got an 8 and a 2, but brand to brand varies, so don't feel like you have to use that. It also depends on how big your drawing is, right? Got a little bit more of a springy round for details that you may end up using. A filbert, springy filbert is pretty good. A very stiff angled bright brush for softening some areas. And then a skinny rigger brush that we use to do the little twigs in there. Okay, hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.